"You were never meant to be born." Those were the first words my biological father spoke to me after 63 years of silence. Standing in the marble entrance of the Blackstone estate, I realized that some dreams should never come true. But Marcus was about to walk through that door and change everything these people thought they knew about power, money, and family. Let me take you back to where this story really begins. 3 months ago, I was Helen Martinez, head nurse at Chicago General Hospital, living quietly in my 2-bedroom apartment with my cat Whiskers and a lifetime of unanswered questions. At 70 years old, I had long given up hope of finding my birth parents. Then the DNA results arrived. The Blackstone family. Real estate empire worth over $3 billion. My biological parents were listed as Catherine Blackstone, 89, and William Blackstone, 91. The irony burned like acid in my throat. While they lived in a 40-room mansion in the Hamptons, spending more on monthly staff salaries than I made in a year, I had worked double shifts for 4 decades to put my son Marcus through medical school. Every penny I earned went toward his education, his dreams, his future. Marcus had become everything I could have hoped for. At 35, he was one of the most sought-after cardiac surgeons in the country. But more importantly, he was the kind of man who still drove 2 hours every weekend just to have dinner with his mother. The private investigator I hired painted a clear picture. The Blackstones had one acknowledged child, Thomas, age 68, who apparently had all the charm of a tax audit. No mention anywhere of a daughter given up for adoption in 1954. Getting a meeting required 3 weeks of legal negotiations. Billionaires do not simply open their doors to strangers, even strangers with DNA evidence proving their parentage. Finally, Catherine Blackstone agreed to 30 minutes of her precious time. The drive from Chicago to the Hamptons gave me 18 hours to imagine every possible scenario. I pictured tears, explanations, maybe even understanding. I had inherited their stubbornness and their sharp wit, traits that had served me well in the hospital when dealing with difficult patients and impossible situations. Marcus wanted to come with me, but I insisted on handling this alone. This was my ghost to face, my past to confront. Besides, he was in surgery that morning, saving lives the way he always did. The Blackstone estate stretched beyond the horizon like something from a fairy tale. Security gates that cost more than my annual salary slowly opened after I provided identification and submitted to questions from guards who looked like they could bench press my car. A butler answered the door. An actual butler with white gloves and everything. He introduced himself as Winston and looked at me like I might pocket the silverware when no one was watching. "Mrs. Martinez," he said, examining my simple blue dress and sensible shoes with barely concealed disdain. "Mrs. Blackstone is waiting in the library." Of course she was waiting in the library. Where else would a billionaire wait for the child she had discarded like yesterday's newspaper? The library was everything you would expect from people with too much money and too little heart. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes that had probably never been opened, Persian rugs worth more than most houses, and windows overlooking manicured gardens that required a team of 12 gardeners to maintain. Catherine Blackstone sat behind a mahogany desk that could have doubled as a landing strip. At 89, she looked like she could outlive granite through pure determination and expensive skin care. Her silver hair was pulled back in a style that probably required professional assistance, and her clothes screamed designer labels and old money. I settled into the chair across from her, wearing my confidence like armor and my J.C. Penney dress like a badge of honor. "So," she said without any preamble, "you claim to be our child." "Not claim," I replied calmly. "I am your child. The DNA results are quite conclusive." She waved a dismissive hand. "Science can be manipulated. People lie about these things all the time, hoping for financial gain." The casual accusation hit me like a slap, but I had dealt with difficult people my entire career. "I assume you want money," she continued, leaning back in her leather chair. "They always do. They always do." How many lost children had knocked on her door over the years? "I want answers," I said simply. "I have spent 70 years wondering who I am, where I came from, why I was abandoned." Catherine studied me like I was a specimen in a laboratory. "You were not abandoned," she said matter-of-factly. You were placed for adoption because you were inconvenient. William and I were young, focused on building our empire. A baby would have been a complication we could not afford. Complication. 7 decades of wondering, and I was nothing more than a complication in their grand business plan. I see, I managed, keeping my voice level despite the rage building in my chest. Good, she said, as if we had settled something important. Now that we understand each other, I trust you will not expect any form of compensation. We made our choice 70 years ago and we stand by it today. The cruelty was breathtaking in its simplicity. This woman had just dismissed my entire existence like I was asking for spare change on a street corner. But I had learned long ago that the best response to cruelty is grace under fire. I stood up slowly, smoothing down my dress and looking around the library one final time. Well, I said, that certainly clarifies things. Beautiful books, by the way. Must be wonderful to surround yourself with so many stories, even if you never bother to read them. If she caught the double meaning, her expression did not show it. Where do you think you are going? Catherine's voice cut through the library like a blade. I assumed our conversation was finished, I replied, turning back to face her. You have made your position quite clear. William has not met you yet, she said. It would be improper to leave without an introduction. How thoughtful. After 70 years of silence, she was suddenly concerned about proper etiquette. Of course, I said, settling back into my chair. Wouldn't want to be improper. William Blackstone entered the library 15 minutes later, moving slowly with the aid of an ornate walking stick. Where Catherine was cold steel wrapped in designer clothing, William was faded elegance barely holding itself together. He had probably been handsome once, but time had reduced him to a fragile shadow of whatever man he used to be. So you are Helen, he said, lowering himself into the chair beside Catherine. You have the family chin. At least he used my name. It was a small improvement over being called a complication. What do you do for work? He asked after studying me for a long moment. Catherine shot him a look that could have frozen hell, but he seemed genuinely curious about my answer. I am a nurse, I said proudly. Head of the cardiac unit at Chicago General Hospital. 43 years of service. I had seen enough shame in my lifetime to know I was not going to start feeling it now, especially not for honest work that had saved countless lives. Noble profession, William said with what seemed like genuine respect. Catherine's expression suggested she disagreed completely with that assessment. William, she said sharply, we have already discussed this situation. Situation. That was what I represented to them. Not daughter, not family. Just a situation to be managed and dismissed. Have you? I asked, feeling my temper start to simmer. Because I have not discussed anything yet. I have not told you about my son or my life or what I have accomplished despite being thrown away like garbage. Catherine's eyes narrowed dangerously. We are not interested in your accomplishments, she said coldly. The sound of approaching voices in the hallway interrupted whatever I was about to say in response. Winston appeared in the doorway, looking more flustered than he had when he first answered the door. Madam, there is a Dr. Martinez here to see you. He says he is Mrs. Martinez's son and that he is expected. My heart stopped. Expected. Marcus and I had discussed this visit extensively, and he was supposed to be in surgery until late afternoon. Expected? Catherine asked sharply, her composure cracking for the first time since I had arrived. Winston nodded. He has identification, and he does bear a strong resemblance to Mrs. Martinez. He also mentioned that he received a text message about the location. That was when I remembered Marcus had indeed texted me during my drive, saying his surgery had been moved and he might try to find me if I needed support. Dr. Marcus Martinez walked into the library like he owned not just the room but the entire estate. My son had inherited my height and determination, but medical school and surgical training had given him a presence that commanded immediate respect. Even in his simple dark suit, he radiated the kind of quiet authority that made people stop talking and start listening. Sorry I am late, Mom, Marcus said, kissing my cheek before turning to face my biological parents. The surgery finished early, and I thought you might appreciate some moral support." Catherine and William stared at him with the kind of recognition that comes from seeing someone featured in medical journals and news stories. Marcus had been profiled in Time magazine the previous year as one of the top cardiac surgeons under 40 in America. "Dr. Martinez?" William asked, his voice filled with something that might have been awe. Marcus smiled with the same warmth that had charmed patients and colleagues for over a decade. "That would be me. Helen's son, your grandson, I suppose." I watched William's face transform as he processed this information. Suddenly, the child they had thrown away had produced something they could understand and respect. "I thought you were in surgery today," I said to Marcus, still processing his unexpected appearance. "Finished 3 hours ahead of schedule," he replied, settling into a chair beside me. "The patient is doing beautifully, by the way. Triple bypass, very complex case, but everything went perfectly." He looked around the library with the kind of polite interest he had perfected during medical conferences and hospital board meetings. "Impressive collection," he said to William and Catherine. "First editions of Dickens, original Shakespeare's, some very rare medical texts. Must be worth several $1 million. Catherine had recovered from her initial surprise, but her carefully maintained composure was clearly strained. "We were not expecting additional visitors," she said stiffly. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "That seems to be a recurring theme with you both, doesn't it? Not expecting people. Not planning for the inconvenient realities of your choices." The temperature in the room dropped noticeably. "Marcus," I started, but he held up his hand. "It's fine, Mom. I've been looking forward to meeting them." He turned back to Catherine and William. "You know, I have heard about you my entire life. Every birthday, every graduation, every major milestone. Mom wondered if her birth parents ever thought about her. If they ever regretted abandoning her. If they ever cared whether she lived or died." William shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Catherine remained motionless, but I could see the muscles in her jaw tightening. "And now I have my answer," Marcus continued calmly. "You did not think about her. You do not regret anything. In fact, you are treating her like she is here to con you out of money rather than finally meet the people who created her and threw her away." The silence in the room was deafening. "We owe her nothing," Catherine said to Marcus, as if I were not sitting 3 feet away. "She has lived her life. We have lived ours. The past is the past." Marcus leaned back in his chair, and I recognized the expression on his face. It was the same one he wore right before delivering bad news to a patient's family. "You are absolutely right," he said, his voice deceptively calm. "You do not owe her anything legally. But I am curious about something interesting I discovered during my drive here." He pulled out his phone and began scrolling through it. "I made some calls to colleagues who specialize in medical history and charitable foundations. Fascinating what you can learn when you know the right people to ask." Catherine and William exchanged glances that spoke of decades of shared secrets. "What are you talking about?" Catherine asked, but her voice lacked its earlier confidence. Marcus held up his phone. "According to publicly available tax records, which are surprisingly detailed when you know where to look, you have donated quite extensively to medical charities over the decades. The most interesting donation was the $10 million you gave to St. Mary's Hospital for Children in 1960, just 6 years after my mother was born." The silence in the room became oppressive. St. Mary's Hospital. That was where I had been treated for pneumonia as a child, where the nuns had cared for me when my adoptive parents could not afford private medical care. $10 million in 1960, Marcus repeated slowly. "That is approximately $90 million in today's money. That is an extraordinary amount to donate to a children's hospital." Catherine finally found her voice, but it was weaker than before. "That donation was made for tax purposes," she said, but her hands were trembling slightly. "Was it?" Marcus asked with the same tone he used when questioning medical students. "Because according to the records, that donation came with very specific stipulations. The money was to be used exclusively for children from, and I quote, disadvantaged backgrounds who require specialized medical care." I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. They had donated millions to help children like me while simultaneously pretending I did not exist. You gave money to help abandoned children while refusing to acknowledge your own, I said quietly. The hypocrisy is staggering. There is more, Marcus said, consulting his phone again. 15 million to children's medical research in 1970. 20 million to the Pediatric Heart Foundation in 1985. Another 30 million to various hospitals and medical schools over the years. He looked up at them. $68 million in total to help sick children, but not one penny to the child you actually abandoned. William was no longer looking at us. His eyes were fixed on his hands, and for the first time, he looked every one of his 91 years. We were trying to help, he said weakly. We were young when Helen was born. We thought we could make amends by helping others. You thought you could buy your way out of guilt, Marcus finished. Unfortunately, conscience does not work that way. That was when we heard car doors slamming outside, followed by loud voices and what sounded like an argument. Winston appeared in the doorway, looking genuinely alarmed. Sir, Madam, Master Thomas has arrived. He seems quite distressed and has several other gentlemen with him. Thomas Blackstone burst into the library like an approaching hurricane. He was a heavy-set man in his late 60s with a kind of soft appearance that came from too many business lunches and not enough physical exercise. His expensive suit was rumpled, his tie was askew, and sweat was pouring down his face despite the cool weather. Mother, father, what the hell do you think you are doing? He gasped, stopping short when he saw Marcus and me. You actually let them into the house. He turned to Winston. I told you to call security the moment anyone showed up asking questions about the family. Thomas, Catherine said sharply. Meet your half-sister Helen and your nephew Marcus. Thomas's eyes widened as he recognized my son, but his panic quickly overwhelmed any starstruck moment he might have experienced. This is a complete disaster, he said, beginning to pace the length of the library. I got calls from 3 different board members in the last hour. Someone has been making inquiries about our family trust structure. Professional inquiries. Legal inquiries. He pointed at Marcus. I assume that was you. Marcus smiled politely. Actually, that would be my attorney, David Chen. Former partner at Goldman Sachs. Now specializes in estate and trust law. Very thorough when it comes to protecting his clients' interests. Thomas's face had gone completely white. What kind of inquiries? Marcus consulted his phone. Well, David has some very interesting friends in the financial sector. When I told him Mom was coming here today, he decided to do some background research on your family trust structure. What did he find? William asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus's expression grew serious. He found that your grandfather was apparently much more forward-thinking than any of you realized. When he established the original family trust in 1950, he included what is called a bloodline equity clause. The room felt like it was tilting. I gripped the arms of my chair to steady myself. What does that mean? I asked quietly. Marcus looked directly at me. It means any biological heir with legitimate DNA evidence is entitled to an equal distribution of trust assets. Thomas gets 1/2 as the acknowledged son, and any other biological children receive equal shares of the remaining assets. He paused for effect. Congratulations, Mom. According to David's calculations, you are entitled to approximately $1.5 billion. Catherine made a choking sound. Thomas dropped into the nearest chair like his legs had given out beneath him. That is impossible, Catherine whispered. We would have known about such a clause. Our lawyers would have found it years ago. Marcus shook his head. Actually, that is the brilliant part. Your grandfather included a provision that the bloodline clause could only be modified with written consent from all living heirs. Since you never acknowledged Helen's existence, she was never asked for consent. The clause has remained active for 70 years. Thomas was gripping the edge of the desk so hard his knuckles had turned white. This will destroy everything, he said. The board, the shareholders, the business partnerships. They all depend on stable family ownership structures. Marcus tilted his head sympathetically. That does sound like a significant problem for you. You don't understand what you are doing, Thomas continued, his voice rising toward hysteria. This is not just about money. This is about 40 years of business relationships, partnerships, board positions, international deals. If word gets out that there has been a hidden heir for 70 years, it will create chaos in every contract we have ever signed. Marcus stood up and began walking around the library like he was delivering a lecture to medical students. You know what, Thomas? I am beginning to understand the family dynamic here. He gestured toward Catherine and William. Your parents abandoned their daughter because she was inconvenient for their business plans. And now you are having a panic attack because acknowledging her might be inconvenient for your business plans. The pattern is quite clear. You do not understand the complexity of our situation, Thomas started, but Marcus cut him off. Oh, I understand perfectly. I work in an industry where reputation is everything, where one malpractice suit can end a career, where every decision has life or death consequences. The difference is I don't abandon family members to protect my professional interests. Marcus pulled out a folder from his briefcase. David also discovered some interesting information about your recent financial activities. Apparently, you have been quietly restructuring assets, moving properties into offshore entities, establishing new corporate structures. He looked directly at Thomas. Almost like you knew this day might come and were preparing for it. William's walking stick clattered to the floor. How could you possibly know about those transactions? He asked in a voice that was barely audible. Marcus's smile was sharp as a scalpel. David has connections everywhere, including friends at the Treasury Department. When you move billions of dollars around, people notice. The question is, why were you preparing for this if you never expected it to happen? Catherine's carefully maintained facade crumbled completely. She looked old and tired and, for the first time, genuinely frightened. We have always known the clause existed, she admitted quietly. Our legal team has been searching for a loophole for decades. And you never found one, Marcus continued. Because your grandfather was smarter than all of you combined. He wanted to ensure that family wealth stayed with family members, not just with whoever happened to be convenient at the time. He turned to me. Mom, you are not just entitled to this inheritance. You are entitled to board positions, voting rights, and complete access to all family business records dating back to 1950. Thomas made a sound like he was physically ill. She cannot just walk in here and take control of everything we have built over 70 years. Marcus's expression hardened. Everything you built. From what I can see, you inherited an empire and have been coasting on your grandfather's vision and your parents' ruthlessness ever since. My phone buzzed with an urgent text message. I glanced at it and felt ice water flow through my veins. David says we have a problem, I read aloud. Apparently, someone at the Blackstone legal firm has been making counter-inquiries about me. They know about my visit here and they are mobilizing their resources. Thomas's face flushed red with renewed panic. I called our attorneys the moment security reported the inquiries about our trust structure. We have rights too. We can protect what belongs to us. Marcus laughed, but the sound was cold and clinical. Protect yourselves from what? From having to acknowledge the daughter you discarded. From taking responsibility for 70 years of lies. From financial extortion, Thomas snapped. From people who think they can show up and demand money from families who have worked for generations to build something meaningful. The venom in his voice was startling. This was my half-brother, a man who shared my blood, and he saw me as nothing more than a threat to his bank account. I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 70 years in my bones. Financial extortion. I said quietly. Thomas, I did not even know about any inheritance until 10 minutes ago. I came here seeking answers, not money. I looked from Catherine to William to Thomas, seeing them clearly for the first time. I wanted to know why. I wanted to understand how 3 people could create a life and then simply forget it existed. I wanted to know if I had inherited your intelligence, your determination, your capacity for love. I walked to the window overlooking their perfect gardens. I wanted family. I wanted to belong somewhere. We were 24 and 26, Catherine said quietly. William's family business was failing. My father threatened to disinherit me if I did not marry someone who could stabilize our financial situation. We thought a baby would destroy everything we were trying to save. So you saved your empire instead, I said, turning back to them. Congratulations. Was it worth it? William retrieved his walking stick with shaking hands. We told ourselves you would be better off, he said. That a young family could give you things we could not provide. Stability, love, attention, a normal childhood. Did you ever check? Yes. Did you ever wonder if your assumptions were correct? Their silence told me everything I needed to know. Because if you had bothered to investigate, I continued, you would have discovered that I was placed with the Rodriguez family. Miguel worked construction. Rosa cleaned office buildings. They had more love than money, but they gave me everything they possessed. The familiar ache in my chest intensified. They died when I was 22. House fire while I was working my first nursing job. After that, it was just me. No family, no safety net, no trust fund to cushion the impact. I gestured around the opulent library. So yes, I built my life from nothing. Yes, I made mistakes and faced hardships, but I never abandoned a child. I never threw away a human being because they were inconvenient. Catherine was crying now, tears cutting tracks through her expertly applied makeup. We cannot undo what we did 70 years ago, she said. We cannot go back and make different choices. No, I agreed. Cannot. But you can choose what happens next. Marcus moved to stand beside me, and I felt his hand slip into mine. My son, my greatest achievement, living proof that love could triumph over the worst circumstances. I have made my decision, I said to Catherine, William, and Thomas. I do not want your money. I want nothing from this family except one thing. Thomas looked up with desperate hope in his eyes. I want you to establish a foundation in my adoptive parents' names. Miguel and Rosa Rodriguez Memorial Foundation. Use my share of the inheritance to provide medical care and educational opportunities for children in foster care and low-income families. The room was completely silent except for the ticking of an antique clock on the mantelpiece. Then Thomas spoke. You are walking away from $1.5 billion. I am giving it to people who understand what family really means, I replied. Unlike the three of you. Thomas stared at me like I had lost my mind. You cannot be serious. You are rejecting $1.5 billion. I nodded calmly. I have lived 70 years without your money. I believe I can manage the rest of my life just fine. But Thomas was not finished. You cannot just give it away either. Foundation establishment requires board approval, legal restructuring, tax compliance issues. The process could take years and cost millions in legal fees. Marcus pulled out his phone again. Actually, according to David, Helen has the right to assign her inheritance directly to any qualified charitable organization. It is called a charitable transfer designation, and it can be executed within 30 days. He smiled at Thomas. Your grandfather really was thorough in protecting family interests. There is another complication, Catherine said quietly. If Helen establishes this foundation, it will become public record. The media will investigate why she is donating such an enormous sum. The entire story will be exposed. She looked at Marcus. Your mother's identity, your relationship to our family, everything we have worked to keep private for 70 years. Marcus's expression grew thoughtful. You know what? You are absolutely right. This will be international news. Renowned surgeon's mother discovers billionaire birth parents. Family reunion after 7 decades. The abandoned daughter who returned to give back. He paused dramatically. Of course, how that story gets told depends entirely on how cooperative everyone chooses to be. Thomas's face was turning purple. Are you threatening us? Marcus shook his head calmly. I am offering you options. We can handle this quietly and professionally, focusing on the positive aspects of Helen's decision to help disadvantaged children. We can emphasize the healing power of forgiveness and family reconciliation. Or, he continued, his voice growing colder, we can do this the other way. The way where I start giving interviews about how my 70-year-old mother was treated when she tried to reconnect with her birth family. Where I discuss the emotional abuse she endured and the callous dismissal she received. The power dynamic in the room had shifted completely. For the first time since I had arrived, the Blackstones were at a disadvantage. "What exactly do you want from us?" Catherine asked quietly. "I want my mother treated with the respect and dignity she deserves," Marcus said simply. "I want public acknowledgement that she exists and has always existed. I want admission that abandoning her was a mistake. And I want this foundation established exactly as she has requested, with full family support and cooperation." "What about Thomas?" William asked weakly. "What happens to his inheritance? His position with the company?" Marcus looked at my half-brother with something that might have been pity. "Thomas retains his half of the inheritance, his board positions, his business relationships. All we are asking is that he stop treating my mother like she is here to steal something that was never entirely his to begin with." "And if we refuse?" Thomas asked. Marcus's smile returned, but it held no warmth whatsoever. "Then David has a very different conversation with his contacts in the financial press. And I have a very different conversation with my contacts in the medical and social media communities." He paused for effect. "Your choice entirely." The silence stretched on for what felt like hours. I could hear my own heartbeat, the ticking of the clock, the distant sound of gardeners working outside. Finally, Catherine spoke. "What would you require from us specifically?" "A public statement," Marcus said without hesitation. "A formal announcement acknowledging Helen as your daughter, and explaining the circumstances surrounding her adoption in a manner that shows respect for all parties involved." He pulled out his phone and began reading. David already prepared a draft statement. "The Blackstone family is pleased to announce the reunion with Catherine and William's daughter, Helen Martinez, who was placed for adoption in 1954 due to challenging family circumstances at that time." He continued reading. "We are deeply proud of the extraordinary life Helen has built and are honored to support her decision to establish the Rodriguez Memorial Foundation, named after her devoted adoptive parents who provided her with love, guidance, and opportunity." How does that sound to everyone? Catherine and William exchanged a long look that spoke of 70 years of marriage and shared secrets. "It sounds fair," Catherine said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. James opened his mouth to object, but William raised his hand weakly. "Helen," William said, looking directly at me for the first time since our conversation began, "I want you to know that not a single day has passed in 70 years that I have not thought about you. About what kind of woman you became, whether you found happiness, whether you were loved." His voice broke slightly. "I know it does not excuse what we did, but you were never forgotten." I felt tears burn my eyes, but I kept my voice steady. "Then why did you never try to find me?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. "Because we were cowards. Because we convinced ourselves you were better off without us. Because admitting we had made a mistake would have meant confronting what we had sacrificed." Catherine stood up slowly, her composure finally completely shattered. "Helen, I know you will probably never forgive us. I know we do not deserve forgiveness. But I need you to understand that giving you away was the greatest mistake of my life." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small photograph, yellowed and creased with age. "This is the only picture I have of you, taken at the hospital before." She could not finish the sentence. The photograph showed a tiny baby with dark hair and serious eyes. Me 70 years ago, looking like I was already preparing to face the world alone. "I have carried this photograph with me every single day since 1954, Catherine continued with trembling hands. "I know it does not compensate for anything, but I want you to have it." She held out the photograph, and I could see her hands shaking. I looked at the picture, then at these 3 people who shared my DNA but had never shared my life, my struggles, my triumphs, or my heartaches. "I will take it," I said finally. "Not because it changes anything between us, but because every child deserves to know where their story began." Marcus moved closer to my side. "There is one final condition," he said to Catherine, William, and Thomas. "The foundation will be headquartered in Chicago. Helen will remain on the advisory board, but she will continue living her life exactly as she chooses. No family obligations, no social expectations, no strings attached whatsoever." I smiled at my son, understanding exactly what he was doing. He was ensuring that I could accept their money for charity without being forced to accept them into my life. And if any of you want any kind of relationship with me in the future, I added, you will have to earn it from the ground up. Like any meaningful relationship should be built on mutual respect, trust, and genuine care for each other's well-being. Catherine nodded through her tears. We understand completely. Thomas still looked like he had swallowed poison, but he did not protest the arrangement. The legal documentation would take several weeks to finalize, but the important conversation was finished. As Marcus and I walked toward the library door, I felt lighter than I had in decades. I had found my birth family, learned the truth about my origins, and discovered that sometimes the family you choose and nurture is infinitely more valuable than the one you are born into. You know what the most important thing is? I said to Marcus as we reached our rental car. He smiled at me. This brilliant man who still called me every day despite his demanding schedule. What is that, Mom? I already had everything I truly needed. I just did not realize it until today. We drove away from the Blackstone estate, leaving behind 70 years of questions and carrying with us the only answer that really mattered. Love is not about genetics or money or even shared history. Love is about choosing to show up for each other, day after day, year after year, through good times and bad. And I had been blessed with someone who had been showing up for me since the moment he was born. The Rodriguez Memorial Foundation would help thousands of children over the coming years, providing medical care, educational opportunities, and hope to those who needed it most. But more importantly, it would stand as a testament to the couple who had chosen love over convenience, who had opened their hearts to a discarded child and given her everything that truly mattered. Sometimes the greatest fortune is not measured in dollars, but in the depth of love we give and receive. And by that measure, I had always been the richest woman in the world. But our story was far from over. As Marcus and I drove through the Hamptons toward the airport, my phone began ringing incessantly. Word travels fast in billionaire circles, and apparently our visit had already sparked considerable interest. The first call came from a reporter at the Wall Street Journal. Mrs. Martinez, we understand you recently visited the Blackstone estate. Can you confirm reports of a family connection? I handed the phone to Marcus without answering. He had dealt with media attention throughout his medical career and knew how to handle persistent journalists. No comment at this time, he said calmly before ending the call. But Mom, we need to be prepared. This story is going to explode once David files the legal paperwork. I nodded, watching the expensive houses blur past our window. I had spent 70 years living quietly, and now I was about to become the center of a media circus. The second call came from someone claiming to be a documentary filmmaker. The third was from a book publisher. By the time we reached the airport, my phone had received 17 calls from various media outlets. Marcus booked us into the airport lounge where we could have some privacy to discuss what came next. Over coffee and overpriced sandwiches, we began planning for the storm that was coming. David called while we waited for our flight. Helen, he said, I need to warn you about something. The Blackstone legal team is already mobilizing. They have hired Morrison, Sterling and Associates. Even I knew that name. Morrison, Sterling was the most ruthless law firm in New York, specializing in protecting wealthy families from scandal and legal challenges. What does that mean for us? Yes. It means they are going to fight this with everything they have, David replied. They will challenge the DNA evidence, question your motives, probably hire private investigators to dig into your background. This is going to get ugly before it gets better. Marcus took the phone. David, what do we need to do to protect Mom? Document everything, David said immediately. Every conversation, every interaction, every piece of evidence. Keep detailed records of all communication with the family or their representatives. And Helen, you need to be prepared for them to attack your character publicly. My stomach dropped. What kind of attacks? They will paint you as a gold digger who abandoned her own responsibilities to chase easy money. They will question why you waited 70 years to come forward. They will probably hire investigators to find any embarrassing incidents from your past. I thought about my life, searching for anything they could use against me. There was the time I had been arrested at a civil rights protest in 1968, but I was proud of that. There was my brief marriage to Marcus's father that had ended in divorce when Marcus was 3, but that was hardly scandalous. Let them investigate, I said finally. I have nothing to hide. I worked hard, raised my son well, and helped save lives for 4 decades. If they want to attack that record, they are welcome to try. That afternoon, while waiting in the Chicago airport lounge, Marcus showed me the first news article about our visit. It was a small item buried in the business section, but the headline made my blood run cold. Mystery woman claims Blackstone fortune. Family denies connection. The article was brief but damaging. According to anonymous sources close to the family, a woman claiming to be Catherine and William Blackstone's daughter had attempted to extort money from the elderly couple. The sources described me as a desperate individual seeking to exploit the family's generosity and reputation. There was no mention of the DNA evidence, no acknowledgement of the conversation we had just finished, no reference to the foundation I wanted to establish. Just a calculated character assassination designed to discredit me before the real story could emerge. Marcus was furious. This is exactly what David warned us about. They are trying to control the narrative before we can present the facts. His phone buzzed with a text message. Patricia Chen wants to meet with us tomorrow morning. She saw the article and wants to help. Patricia Chen was Marcus's former girlfriend and current publicist, one of the most connected people in Chicago's social and media circles. If anyone could help us navigate the coming storm, it was Patricia. That evening, back in my small apartment, I sat looking at the yellowed photograph Catherine had given me. Such a tiny thing to carry such enormous weight. This single picture represented 70 years of secrets, lies, and missed opportunities. Marcus had insisted on staying the night, sleeping on my couch like he used to do during medical school when he was too tired to drive home after studying. Having him close gave me comfort as I tried to process everything that had happened. Could not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Catherine's cold expression, heard her dismissive words, felt the casual cruelty of people who had everything but understood nothing about the value of human connection. But I also remembered the tears in her eyes at the end, the trembling in her hands as she gave me the photograph. Perhaps there was more to this story than simple greed and abandonment. Perhaps they had convinced themselves they were doing the right thing. The next morning, Patricia Chan arrived at my apartment looking like she had stepped out of a fashion magazine. Tall, elegant, and radiating the kind of confidence that came from years of managing high-profile clients, she settled into my kitchen chair like she belonged there. "Helen," she said after Marcus had explained the situation, "you are about to become one of the most famous women in America. We need to get ahead of this story before the Blackstone spin machine destroys your reputation." She pulled out a tablet and began showing me news articles that had appeared overnight. The story was spreading faster than we had anticipated. Billionaire family under siege by mystery claimant. Elderly couple victimized by inheritance scam. Chicago nurses desperate grab for fortune. Each headline was worse than the last. The anonymous sources were becoming bolder in their character attacks, painting me as everything from a mentally unstable fantasist to a calculating con artist. But Patricia was already working on our response. "I have scheduled interviews with 3 major networks for tomorrow," she said. "We will present your side of the story with dignity and documentation. David is preparing a complete evidence package including the DNA results, the historical records, and the trust documents." She looked directly at me. "Helen, I need you to understand something. Once we do these interviews, there is no going back. You will be a public figure for the rest of your life. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about the quiet life I had built, the anonymity I had treasured, the simple pleasures of my daily routine. All of that was about to disappear forever. But I also thought about the children who would benefit from the Rodriguez Memorial Foundation, the families who would receive medical care they could not otherwise afford, the opportunities that would be created in my adoptive parents' names. "I am prepared," I said finally. The interviews were scheduled for the following afternoon. Marcus took the day off from surgery to be with me, and Patricia spent the morning coaching me on how to handle hostile questions and personal attacks. The first interview was with Sarah Chen from CNN. She was professional but skeptical, clearly influenced by the negative coverage that had dominated the news cycle. "Mrs. Martinez," she began, "critics are saying you waited 70 years to make this claim because you were hoping the original family members would die and be unable to dispute your story. How do you respond to that?" I looked directly into the camera, drawing on decades of experience dealing with difficult families in hospital waiting rooms. "Sarah," I respond by saying that I spent 70 years trying to build a good life despite being abandoned as a baby. I worked double shifts as a nurse to put my son through medical school. I never needed their money before, and I do not need it now. The only reason I sought them out was to understand where I came from. But why now? Press. Why at age 70? Because DNA testing has finally advanced to the point where I could prove my parentage beyond any doubt. And because I realized that my questions would die with me if I did not find answers soon. The second interview with Tom Williams from ABC was more aggressive. He had clearly been briefed by someone connected to the Blackstone family. "Mrs. Martinez, sources close to the family say you became hostile when they refused to give you money. They describe you as angry and demanding. Is that accurate?" I felt my temper flare, but Patricia had prepared me for exactly this question. "Tom," I became disappointed when I realized that these people viewed me as nothing more than an inconvenience to be dismissed. When Catherine Blackstone told me I was never wanted and should not expect money, I was hurt. But I never demanded anything except acknowledgement of my existence. "What about the billion-dollar inheritance claim?" Williams continued. "Are you denying that you knew about the family trust before your visit?" "I learned about the inheritance 5 minutes before you did, Tom. My son's attorney discovered it while researching the family background. Until that moment, I had no idea any inheritance existed." The third interview was with Maria Santos from NBC, and she approached the story from a different angle. "Mrs. Martinez, you are asking for nothing for yourself but want to establish a charitable foundation. Some people find that hard to believe. Why would you give away so much money?" I smiled at this question because it was the easiest one to answer. "Maria, money cannot buy back 70 years of wondering who I was or where I belonged. Money cannot heal the wounds of abandonment or create the family relationships I never had. But money can help other children who are facing the same challenges I faced. My adoptive parents, Miguel and Rosa Rodriguez, gave me everything they had despite having very little. They taught me that love and generosity are more valuable than wealth. The Rodriguez Memorial Foundation will honor their memory by helping children who need exactly what they gave me: hope, opportunity, and unconditional love." After the interviews, Patricia was cautiously optimistic. "You did well, Helen. You came across as sincere, dignified, and motivated by genuine concern for others rather than personal greed." But the Blackstone response was swift and brutal. Within hours of the interviews airing, their legal team held a press conference. James Morrison, the senior partner at Morrison Sterling, stood behind a podium looking like he was announcing a war. "The Blackstone family categorically denies any relationship to Helen Martinez," he declared. "Mrs. Martinez has provided no credible evidence of any family connection. Her claims are based on questionable DNA testing and decades-old adoption records that cannot be verified." He held up a thick folder. "We have evidence that Mrs. Martinez has a history of financial difficulties, including bankruptcy filings and unpaid debts. This appears to be a desperate attempt to solve personal financial problems by targeting a prominent family." I watched the press conference from my living room, feeling sick to my stomach. Every word was a calculated lie designed to destroy my credibility. Marcus was pacing my small living room like a caged animal. "They are manufacturing evidence," he said angrily. "You have never filed for bankruptcy. You have never had significant debts beyond normal living expenses." Patricia was already on her phone, making calls to fact-checkers and investigative journalists. "This is going to backfire on them," she said confidently. "When the media discovers they are lying about verifiable facts, it will raise questions about everything else they have claimed." David called an hour later with news that changed everything. "Helen," he said, "I just received a very interesting phone call from someone claiming to be William Blackstone's former personal secretary. My heart started racing. What did she want? Her name is Margaret Thompson. She worked for the family from 1950 to 1985. She says she has documents that prove everything you have said about your birth and adoption. She wants to meet with us tomorrow. The next morning, Marcus and I drove to a small cafe in downtown Chicago where Margaret Thompson was waiting for us. She was a woman in her 80s, impeccably dressed despite her age, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Mrs. Martinez," she said as we sat down, "I have been waiting 70 years to tell someone this story." She opened an old briefcase and pulled out a manila folder thick with documents. "I was William Blackstone's secretary for 35 years. I handled all of his personal correspondence, including the arrangements for your adoption." She handed me a letter written in William's handwriting. This is a letter he wrote to his father in 1954, explaining why he and Catherine felt they had to give you up. He was torn apart by the decision. I read the letter with trembling hands. The words painted a picture of two young people who were genuinely anguished by their choice but felt trapped by family and financial pressures. "There is more," Margaret continued. She pulled out bank records, legal documents, and personal correspondence spanning several decades. "William never forgot about you. He hired private investigators to check on your welfare at least 6 times over the years. The last report was from 1995. It detailed my work as a nurse, Marcus's success in medical school, even included photographs of us together at his graduation. William had known exactly who I had become and what kind of life I had built." "Why are you coming forward now?" Marcus asked. "Because I am 87 years old and I cannot take these secrets to my grave," Margaret replied. "Because what they are doing to your mother in the media is wrong. And because William made me promise on his deathbed that if you ever came forward, I would tell you the truth." She handed me one final document. "This is a letter William wrote to you in 2010, shortly before he became too ill to write. He never sent it because Catherine convinced him it would only cause more pain. The letter was addressed to my dear daughter Helen. In it, William expressed his regret, his pride in what I had accomplished, and his hope that someday I might be able to forgive him. He wrote about watching my career from a distance, about knowing that I had become everything he had hoped I would be despite the circumstances of my birth. The letter ended with words that brought tears to my eyes. "You have lived a life of service and love that puts my own accomplishments to shame. I hope that someday you will understand that giving you up was not about not wanting you, but about wanting better for you than we thought we could provide. I have loved you from a distance for 70 years, and I will love you until my last breath." Margaret wiped her own eyes as I finished reading. "He was a good man who made a terrible mistake. Catherine convinced him that maintaining the secret was the only way to protect everyone involved. But he never stopped caring about you." Patricia arranged for Margaret to tell her story to the same journalists who had interviewed me. The impact was immediate and devastating for the Blackstone legal strategy. Former secretary reveals decades of Blackstone family secrets. Documents prove abandoned daughter's claims. Family tracked lost child for 40 years. The tide of public opinion shifted overnight. Social media exploded with support for my story and criticism of the family's attempts to discredit me. #Justice for Helen began trending on Twitter. James Morrison held another press conference, but this time he looked like a man watching his strategy crumble in real time. The evidence presented by Mrs. Thompson appears to be authentic. He admitted reluctantly. The family is reviewing their position in light of these new developments. That evening, my phone rang with a call I never expected to receive. It was Catherine Blackstone. "Helen," she said, her voice small and fragile, "I want to apologize. Not just for what we did 70 years ago, but for what we have put you through this week. The lies, the attacks on your character, the attempts to discredit you. Was wrong." I sat in my kitchen, holding the phone with hands that were surprisingly steady. "Why, Catherine? Why the lies? Why the vicious attacks?" "Because I was terrified," she admitted. "Terrified that the world would see us as we really are. Terrified that admitting the truth would destroy everything we had built. Terrified that you would hate us for what we did." She was crying now, And for the first time since this ordeal began, she sounded like a mother who had lost her child rather than a businesswoman protecting her assets. Thomas convinced us that fighting you was the only way to protect the family reputation. James Morrison assured us that discrediting you would make the whole story disappear. We were wrong about everything. What happens now? Yes. Now we tell the truth, Catherine said. Now we acknowledge you publicly as our daughter. Now we establish your foundation exactly as you requested. And now we hope that someday you might be able to forgive two foolish old people who made the worst mistake of their lives. The public reconciliation took place 1 week later at a press conference held at the Blackstone estate. Catherine, William, and Thomas stood together as Catherine read a prepared statement acknowledging me as their daughter and apologizing for the decades of silence. I stood beside them, holding Marcus's hand, as cameras flashed and reporters asked questions. It was surreal to be back in the same house where this journey had begun, but this time as a welcomed member of the family rather than an unwanted intruder. The Rodriguez Memorial Foundation was officially established with an initial endowment of $1.5 billion. The foundation would provide medical care, educational scholarships, and family support services for children in foster care and low-income families. At the dedication ceremony, I spoke about Miguel and Rosa Rodriguez, the couple who had loved me unconditionally and taught me that family is defined by commitment rather than genetics. Their legacy would now help thousands of children who needed exactly what they had given me: hope, opportunity, and proof that they mattered. Catherine approached me after the ceremony. She moved slowly, using a walker that she had not needed during our first meeting. The stress of recent weeks had taken a visible toll on her health. "Helen," she said quietly, "I know we can never be a real family. Too much time has passed, and too much damage has been done. But I hope that we can at least find peace with each other." I looked at this woman who had given me life but never given me love, who had carried me for 9 months but then spent 70 years pretending I did not exist. "Catherine," I said, "I cannot promise you forgiveness because some wounds never fully heal. But I can promise you something better. I can promise you that I will not carry hatred in my heart for the time I have left on this earth." She nodded, understanding that this was as close to reconciliation as we would ever come. Thomas surprised me by approaching as I was leaving the estate for what I knew would be the final time. "Helen," he said awkwardly, "I want you to know that what we did to you in the media was inexcusable. I was scared of losing everything I had worked for, and I let that fear turn me into someone I am ashamed of." He handed me a business card. "If you ever need anything at all, for yourself or for the foundation, please call me. I want to try to make amends for what we put you through." I took the card and slipped it into my purse. "Thank you, Thomas. That means more than you know." As Marcus and I drove away from the Blackstone estate for the last time, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with money or public acknowledgement or even family reconciliation. I had sought answers about my past and found them. I had faced the people who had abandoned me and survived the encounter with my dignity intact. I had discovered that the family I had built was stronger than the one I had been born into. Most importantly, I had turned my pain into purpose. The Rodriguez Memorial Foundation would help thousands of children over the coming decades, providing them with opportunities that my adoptive parents would have been proud to support. Marcus reached over and squeezed my hand as we drove through the city toward home. "You did it, Mom. You found the truth and turned it into something beautiful." I squeezed his hand back, thinking about all the years we had spent together, all the challenges we had overcome, all the love we had shared despite the circumstances of our beginning. "Yes," I said, watching the familiar streets of Chicago pass by outside our window. "I did. And now I know exactly who I am and where I belong. I belonged with the man sitting beside me, the son who had chosen to love me every day of his life. I belonged with the memory of Miguel and Rosa Rodriguez, who had taught me that love is a choice rather than an accident of birth. I belonged with the thousands of children who would be helped by our foundation, who would know that someone cared about their future. The Blackstone fortune had provided the means, but love had provided the motive. And in the end, love was the only inheritance that truly mattered. 6 months later, the Rodriguez Memorial Foundation had helped its first 100 families. Children received medical care they could not afford. Students received scholarships to attend college. Families received support to stay together during difficult times. I received letters from parents thanking me for giving their children hope. I received pictures of graduation ceremonies and birthday parties and family reunions made possible by foundation support. Each letter reminded me that sometimes the greatest victories come from the deepest wounds. Catherine Blackstone died peacefully in her sleep 8 months after our reconciliation. William followed her 3 weeks later, as if he could not bear to be separated from her even in death. They were buried in the family plot at a private ceremony that I watched from a distance. Thomas inherited their portion of the estate and, to his credit, continued to support the foundation's work. We maintained a cordial but distant relationship, two people connected by blood but divided by history. Margaret Thompson became an unofficial advisor to the foundation, using her decades of experience with the Blackstone family to help us navigate complex legal and financial issues. She lived to see the foundation's first annual report, documenting the lives that had been changed and the futures that had been secured. As for me, I returned to my quiet life in Chicago, but with a purpose that extended far beyond my own needs and desires. I remained head nurse at Chicago General until my retirement at age 75, then devoted my time to foundation work and spending time with Marcus and his growing family. Marcus married Patricia Chen 2 years after our adventure with the Blackstones. Their wedding was a small, intimate ceremony that focused on love rather than spectacle. They gave me 2 beautiful grandchildren who called me abuela, honoring the heritage of the grandparents they never met but whose legacy lived on through the foundation. Every year on the anniversary of that first meeting at the Blackstone estate, Marcus and I visit the Rodriguez Memorial Garden that was established at Chicago General Hospital. We sit on the bench dedicated to Miguel and Rosa Rodriguez and remember the people who taught us that family is not about where you come from, but about who chooses to walk beside you through life. The garden is filled with flowers that bloom in every season, representing the ongoing cycles of hope and renewal that define the human experience. Children play on the nearby playground while their parents receive medical care they can afford because of foundation support. It is a living testament to the truth that love multiplied becomes legacy, that pain transformed becomes purpose, and that sometimes the family you create is more powerful than the one you inherit. Standing in that garden, surrounded by the evidence of lives changed and futures secured, I know with absolute certainty that every moment of struggle, every year of wondering, every tear of abandonment led me exactly where I was meant to be. I found my birth family and discovered they were flawed, complicated people who made terrible mistakes but were capable of growth and redemption. I found my chosen family and realized they had been everything I needed all along. But most importantly, I found myself. Not Helen Martinez, the abandoned child, or Helen Martinez, the long-lost heiress, but Helen Martinez, the woman who chose to turn her pain into healing for others. That woman, shaped by love rather than defined by loss, was worth more than any inheritance could ever be.